I never thought it would happen like that, never in a million years. I always imagined myself making mistakes, small ones, embarrassing ones maybe, but nothing that would feel like it could unravel the very idea of who I was. And yet there I was, standing in my sister's room, holding a dress in my hands, frozen in a mixture of disbelief and shame, wishing the ground would just open up and swallow me whole. I had no plan, no scheme, no intention to become someone else that evening, but somehow, by some cruel twist of fate, I had become exactly that someone who was suddenly unrecognizable to themselves. It started as a dare, the kind you think is harmless, the kind you think is just for laughs. My sister, Emma, she had this teasing way about her, always pushing boundaries, always challenging the lines of decency with a smile that made it hard to say no. I told myself I wasn't going to do it, that I wasn't the kind of person who would fall for one of her childish games. But then she held up that dress, a pale, delicate thing, soft to the touch, with a zipper at the back, and said, almost too softly, "I dare you to try it on." Her eyes weren't mocking, at least not at first. They were steady, watching me with a calmness that made it harder to resist than I expected. I should have just walked away. I really should have. But I didn't. Instead, I let curiosity win, let the nervous thrill take over, and before I knew it, I was inside the dress, struggling to pull it over my shoulders. And that was when panic really hit. I could feel the fabric tighten around me in ways I hadn't anticipated, each tug and stretch pressing me into an unfamiliar shape. My face was flushed, my hands trembling as I tried to reach behind me to zip it up, but I couldn't. My fingers fumbled over the zipper, knocking it awkwardly, failing again and again. And then, just as embarrassment threatened to turn into full-blown panic, I felt her hands on mine. She didn't laugh. She didn't tease. She didn't say a word. She simply guided my hands to the zipper, steadying them, and slowly, carefully, helped me pull it up. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to send a wave of relief and confusion through me. Relief because I wasn't trapped in this dress forever, and confusion because I hadn't expected this kindness. I had expected mockery, a joke, a story she'd retell to everyone for weeks. But instead, she just looked at me, her expression neutral, almost serene, and said, "There, you're fine." Fine. That word stuck with me, echoing in my head long after I had stepped out of the room. Fine. But I wasn't fine, not really. Something had shifted inside me that night. I couldn't explain it, and I couldn't understand it, but I felt lighter, almost, as if part of me that had been hiding, pretending, had finally been allowed to breathe. And the strangest part was that it wasn't fear I felt anymore, it was something else. A mix of curiosity, vulnerability, and a flicker of courage that I hadn't known I possessed. Over the following days, I found myself thinking about that moment constantly. I kept replaying it in my mind, the way the fabric had clung to me, the way my body had felt different, the way Emma had looked at me without judgment. I realized, slowly, that it wasn't just the dress I was thinking about. It was the act itself, the permission I had never given myself to explore a side of me I had buried under years of self-consciousness and societal expectations. I began to notice small things, little signs that I had been ignoring, the way I admired certain clothes when I walked past stores, the way I lingered at the mirror, wondering how I would look if I let myself step outside the lines. I started cautiously. At first, it was just small touches: a scarf, a hat, a shirt that felt soft against my skin. I tried them on when no one was around, locking the door and holding my breath, waiting for the shame to hit me like it always had before. But it didn't. Instead, there was a strange, quiet thrill, a sense that I was discovering something authentic, something that had been buried under layers of habit and fear. And slowly, carefully, I began to experiment more boldly, letting myself try dresses, skirts, blouses, and each time, the world didn't collapse. I didn't fall apart. I simply existed, in a new way, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Emma noticed, of course. She always notices. At first, she said nothing. I would catch her out of the corner of my eye, watching me, and I would feel the old panic rise, expecting laughter, mockery, something cruel. But again, there was nothing. Just a quiet, steady presence, as if she understood something I didn't yet understand about myself. And then, one evening, she came into my room while I was trying on a new dress and simply said, "You can zip it up yourself now." Her voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact, but the words carried a weight I hadn't expected. They were a challenge, yes, but also an invitation. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and slowly, deliberately, zipped the dress myself. And in that moment, I realized that the real transformation wasn't in the clothes. It was in me. The following weeks were a whirlwind of self-discovery and quiet confrontation. I experimented with hairstyles, makeup, accessories, and each step felt like peeling back a layer of fear and expectation. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't doing it to shock or impress. I was doing it for me, to finally meet the person I had been hiding from, even from myself. And the more I embraced this side of me, the more Emma's quiet support became apparent. She never pushed, never mocked, never made it a joke. She simply helped when help was needed and otherwise gave me space to grow, to explore, to stumble, and to rise again. The most difficult part, of course, was facing my own doubts, my own judgments. I had been taught to believe that this side of me was wrong, unnatural, embarrassing. Every time I looked in the mirror, I wrestled with that voice, the one that whispered I was making a mistake, that I was being foolish, that I was risking ridicule and rejection. But then I would remember that night, the way Emma had helped me with the zipper, the way she hadn't laughed, the way she had simply been there. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to believe that maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe I wasn't foolish. Maybe this was me, in a way I had never dared to be before. The first time I went out dressed fully as myself, the real me, was terrifying. I can still feel the cold sweat, the racing heartbeat, the knot in my stomach as I stepped into the world, carrying both fear and courage in equal measure. But Emma was there, waiting with a quiet nod, a small smile, and that same steady presence that had carried me through every step of this journey. I walked, then ran, then stumbled, and each time I rose a little taller, a little freer, a little more fully myself. And every time I looked at her, I saw not judgment or ridicule, but understanding, compassion, and the kind of support that transforms a life. It hasn't been easy. There are days when doubt creeps in, when fear whispers that I shouldn't be this way, that the world will reject me, that I am asking for trouble by daring to be myself. But then I remember the night of the dress, the way she helped me zip it up without a word, without a laugh, without a hint of cruelty. I remember the quiet courage she showed me, the patience, the faith in me even when I didn't have it in myself. And I push forward, step by step, experiment by experiment, until I am no longer hiding, no longer pretending, no longer afraid. This journey has taught me more about identity, courage, and acceptance than I ever imagined possible. I have learned that transformation isn't just about clothing, or appearance, or even the labels we give ourselves. It's about finding the parts of ourselves we have denied, the parts we have feared, and learning to hold them gently, proudly, and without shame. And it's about the people who choose to walk with us in that journey, who don't mock or belittle, but who help us, even in the smallest ways, to become who we are meant to be. I still remember the weight of that dress in my hands, the trembling of my fingers as I reached for the zipper, the knot of panic in my chest. I remember the way her hands steadied mine, the way her eyes met mine, and the simple, profound act of help that changed everything. She didn't laugh. She helped me zip it up. And in that act, she gave me permission not just to wear a dress, but to exist fully, authentically, unapologetically. Now, when I look back, I realize that moment wasn't just a beginning. It was a revelation. It was the moment I discovered that courage isn't always loud. It isn't always defiant. Sometimes, courage is quiet. Sometimes, it's as simple as a hand reaching out to help another hand find its way, to pull up a zipper, to step fully into who they are meant to be. And that is a gift I carry with me every day, a reminder that acceptance, kindness, and quiet support can transform a life in ways we never expect. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know where this journey will take me. But I do know this: I will never forget that night, that dress, that zipper, that hand. I will never forget the courage it took to say yes, and the courage it took to help someone else find their way. And I will never forget that sometimes, the most profound acts of love and support are the ones that require no words at all. She didn't laugh. She helped me zip it up. And in doing so, She helped me become myself. After that night, life didn't suddenly become easy or simple. In fact, for a while, it felt almost harder. Every time I left my room fully dressed as myself, I carried a tight knot of anxiety in my chest, a constant reminder that the world outside my door might not be as forgiving as Emma had been. I would catch my reflection in store windows or car mirrors and feel a flicker of panic before I reminded myself to breathe, to stand tall, to be who I knew I truly was. But with each passing day, each small risk, that flicker grew weaker, and the part of me that had once cowered began to feel stronger, more visible, more real. It was during a quiet afternoon, just a week after the first real step outside, that the first real challenge came. I had been invited to a small gathering at a friend's house, someone who I knew well enough to trust, but still, my nerves were raw. The fear wasn't just about being seen, it was about the judgment I imagined, the whispers I imagined, the way I imagined everything collapsing if someone looked too closely. I almost didn't go. I almost backed out. But then I remembered Emma, her steady hands, her calm eyes, the way she had given me permission without words. I realized that backing down now would be letting fear dictate the terms of my life. So I went. The walk to my friend's house felt like an eternity. Every step on the pavement was loud in my ears, every glance from passers-by a possible threat. I kept my head down at first, careful, cautious, testing the waters. And then something surprising happened. No one stared. No one mocked. People smiled politely, chatted normally, treated me just like themselves. And slowly, that tight knot of fear began to loosen. I started to walk taller, to hold my head higher, to feel for the first time that maybe the world wasn't as unforgiving as I had imagined. Inside, my friends noticed, of course. Some were curious, some whispered quietly, some asked questions that I fumbled to answer. And yet, none of it felt cruel. None of it felt threatening. There was a hesitation, yes, a kind of cautious wonder, but behind it all, I could feel a growing acceptance, or at least, a willingness to see me as more than just the person they thought I was. I realized then that transformation isn't just personal. It's relational. It's the way others respond, the way they choose to acknowledge or ignore, to support or undermine, the parts of us that we are still discovering. Returning home that night, I felt a strange sense of triumph. Not a loud, dramatic triumph, but a quiet one, a personal victory that no one else could claim. I had faced the world, faced fear, and come out on the other side, still whole, still me. And yet, the journey was far from over. For every moment of confidence, there were still shadows of doubt. For every small victory, there was still the internal voice reminding me that the world might not be ready, that some people might never understand. Emma noticed the subtle changes before anyone else did. She never commented directly, never made me feel scrutinized, but I could feel her pride, her silent encouragement, in the way she looked at me, the small gestures she made, the fact that she always offered help when I needed it and stepped back when I didn't. And one night, after months of careful experimentation, she did something that surprised me almost as much as the first zipper. She handed me a box, a small, beautifully wrapped box, and said, "I thought you might like to try this." No pressure. Inside were accessories I hadn't dared to explore yet, delicate jewelry, subtle scarves, and even a pair of shoes that felt entirely beyond what I had imagined myself wearing. The gesture wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it carried more weight than anything she had said before. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of my growth, of my courage, of the fact that I was finding myself, step by step, and she was willing to walk alongside me without judgment, without laughter, without hesitation. That night, alone in my room, I tried each piece slowly, carefully, studying my reflection with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The person in the mirror was still me, but also someone entirely new, someone I had always been but never allowed to surface. The transformation wasn't just in the dress, the accessories, the clothing, it was in the way I held myself, the way I breathed, the way I allowed myself to exist fully without apology. And then came the first real test beyond the safety of home and trusted friends, the mall. A place bustling with strangers, people who didn't know me, who wouldn't give me the benefit of assumed understanding. My heart raced as I stepped through the automatic doors, felt the cool air of the shopping center, and looked around at the sea of faces. Every glance felt like a potential threat. Every reflection in the glass storefronts challenged me. But then I remembered Emma, remembered her hands, her quiet support, her refusal to mock, and I allowed myself to take each step without running, without hiding. The world, surprisingly, didn't react with cruelty. Some people looked curiously, some smiled politely, and others didn't notice at all. And in that moment, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the clothes, the hair, the makeup. It was the courage to show myself to the world, to allow myself to be seen fully, without fear of judgment. I walked, I lingered, I shopped, and with every movement, I felt a little more free, a little more whole, a little more like the person I had always been underneath the layers of doubt. Returning home, I collapsed into my bed, exhausted but exhilarated. I thought back to the first night, the trembling fingers, the zipper, the hand that helped me. I thought about all the small moments since the scarves, the jewelry, the quiet experiments, the cautious steps into the world. And I realized that transformation isn't a single moment. It isn't a single act. It's a series of choices, some terrifying, some exhilarating, some quiet and invisible, all adding up to a life that feels truer, fuller, and more authentic than anything I had known before. Emma came into my room that evening, smiled, and simply said, "You did it today." I wanted to protest, to downplay, to say it wasn't a big deal, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had done it. And it was more than just the outfit, more than just stepping outside. It was the courage to be me, fully, openly, and without apology. And in her eyes, I saw the reflection of someone who believed in me, someone who had helped me become brave enough to take that step. The zipper, the dress, the hand that steadied mine, they weren't just a memory. They were a guidepost, a marker of where transformation began, a reminder that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, the quietest gestures, can change the trajectory of a life forever. And as I lay in my bed that night, exhausted but alive, I realized something that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. She didn't laugh. She helped me zip it up. And because of that, I learned that courage, acceptance, and self-discovery are possible even when fear says they're not, even when the world seems ready to judge, even when we doubt ourselves the most. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how many steps I will take, or how far I will go, or what challenges I will face next. But I do know this: I will never forget the night I first wore the dress, the panic, the trembling hands, the fear, and the quiet, steady guidance that changed everything. I will never forget the lesson embedded in that moment: that transformation isn't about perfection, or speed, or applause. It's about courage. It's about patience. It's about the simple, profound truth that someone can help you discover yourself, and in that discovery, you can finally, fully, become who you are meant to be. The day I decided to truly show the world who I was, I felt the old, familiar knot of fear tighten in my chest. But this time, it wasn't the kind of panic that made me want to run or hide. It was the kind that demanded courage, that whispered I had to take the next step, even if my hands shook, even if my heart raced. I looked in the mirror one last time, adjusting the dress, the scarf, the subtle jewelry Emma had gifted me. Every detail felt deliberate, a part of the story I was finally telling about myself. Walking out of my front door that morning felt heavier than ever, but also lighter in a strange way. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't pretending. I was stepping fully into a self I had only glimpsed in secret before. Each footstep down the sidewalk felt like a heartbeat of defiance against the years of doubt and fear. And as I reached the corner, I realized something remarkable: the world didn't collapse. It didn't judge. It didn't even seem to notice me in the way I had feared. Strangers passed, some glanced, some smiled, but nothing like the sharp, cutting judgment I had imagined. By the time I reached the park, I started noticing the small victories. A child pointed and smiled. A woman nodded politely. I realized that my fear had been amplifying everything, making me expect ridicule where there wasn't any. And for the first time, I felt what real freedom could be like: not the fantasy of safety behind closed doors, but the tangible, alive experience of being fully, unapologetically myself in public. Then, I saw them. My parents. They were seated on a bench, as ordinary and mundane as any other moment. And yet, the thought of being seen by them filled me with a mixture of dread and hope. I froze for a heartbeat, imagining the worst: the laughter, the questions, the judgment, but then I remembered Emma's calm eyes, her hand on mine, and the simple, life-changing lesson she had taught me. Acceptance can be quiet, it can be gentle, it can give courage without demanding perfection. I walked toward them, each step deliberate, steadying my trembling hands. As I came closer, I saw my mother's eyes widen, not in mockery, not in anger, but in recognition. She hesitated, as if waiting for me to explain, to stumble, to shrink back into the shadows. But I didn't. I stopped a few feet away, met her gaze, and simply said, "It's me. I'm still me." The silence that followed felt endless, and I braced myself for disappointment, for rejection. But instead, my father smiled softly, my mother's lips quivered, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they both nodded. No dramatic speeches, no tears, no shouting, just quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken acceptance that left me breathless. I realized then that the hardest part had been my own fear, my own doubt. The world, in its quiet indifference, had given me the space to exist fully, and my family, in their own hesitant way, had stepped into that space with me. Over the following weeks, I began to integrate my identity into every corner of my life. Work was the next challenge. I walked into the office one morning, heart pounding, fully dressed as myself, and waited for the reactions. Some colleagues were curious, some whispered quietly, some stared awkwardly. But no one laughed. No one mocked. And in the meetings, in the hallways, I felt a strange new power. The courage to be myself didn't need external validation, it simply needed to exist, firmly and unapologetically. Emma's quiet support never wavered. She celebrated small victories with me, a compliment, a shared smile, a quiet nod of approval. And gradually, I realized that transformation isn't a single moment, or a single outfit, or a single act of bravery. It's a series of choices, repeated over and over, sometimes terrifying, sometimes exhilarating, all of them adding up to a life that feels authentically yours. The final breakthrough came unexpectedly. A friend invited me to a community event, a space I had avoided for months out of fear. My heart raced as I entered, scanning the crowd, expecting judgment, ridicule, anything to make me shrink back. But instead, I was met with smiles, polite greetings, and genuine curiosity. I realized in that moment that my fears had been magnified by my imagination, and the world, quietly, was more accepting than I had believed. And more importantly, I had grown strong enough, confident enough, and brave enough to step into that acceptance without hesitation. At home that night, I found Emma waiting. She didn't say anything at first. She simply smiled, that same calm, steady smile that had guided me from the very beginning. And then she said, "You did it. You didn't just zip it up. You became yourself." I felt a lump rise in my throat, tears threatening, not from fear, not from embarrassment, but from the overwhelming relief and gratitude I felt. I had walked through panic, through doubt, through fear, and emerged not broken, not smaller, but larger, fuller, alive in ways I hadn't thought possible. Looking back now, I realize that the transformation wasn't just about the clothes, the makeup, or the appearances. It was about courage, about vulnerability, about the willingness to be seen, to stumble, to rise, and to continue despite fear. It was about the hands that guided me, the quiet support that never judged, and the simple acts of trust and patience that changed the course of a life. I still remember that first night, the trembling hands, the zippered dress, the quiet presence that steadied me. I remember thinking that I was alone, that no one could understand, that I had to hide forever. And now I know the truth. Sometimes, transformation begins not with a grand gesture, not with applause, but with one simple, profound act of help. She didn't laugh. She helped me zip it up. And in doing so, she helped me find the courage to live, fully, authentically, and unapologetically as myself. I will never forget that night, that zipper, that hand. I will never forget the quiet, life-changing lesson it taught me, that courage is born in small moments, that acceptance can be gentle and unwavering, and that being yourself is always worth the fear, always worth the struggle, and always worth the moment when you finally step into the world and say, without apology, "This is me." And now, as I stand in front of the mirror, fully dressed, fully me, fully alive, I smile not because the journey is over, but because it has only just begun. Because I know that the fear will return, that doubt will whisper, and that challenges will come. But I also know that I am ready. I am steady. I am myself. And no one, no fear, no hesitation, and no judgment will ever take that away. She didn't laugh. She helped me zip it up. And because of that, I became more than I ever imagined I could be. I became fully, unashamedly, undeniably myself.